That is a big box, huh? Hello. I'm actually filming this at the end of my day. I have literally feel like I've been everywhere today, like literally everywhere. There's a big spire just there in the middle of the Houses of Parliament, which separates the House of Lords on the far end from the House of Commons on this end. And mostly what you can see here are committee rooms. And it's the committee rooms which actually produce most of the documentation of what happens in the Parliament, because although the most famous part and the most sort of known part is the big debating house where you see the Prime Minister standing at the dispatch box, the parliamentary records are actually made up of just about all of the other stuff that happens in all the committee rooms. The stuff really you never actually ever really hear about. Also the stuff that actually nobody ever watches. I mean, the Victoria Tower there at the end, that's for all like the parliamentary records, which are mostly like digital now because they live stream everything from inside the building. The only problem being, although it's supposed to be for transparency, that they document and anyone can go onto Parliament Live and watch any of the live streams, but I really don't think anybody ever does. It's supposed to be about transparency, really. I think it's TLDR or whatever, it's too long, do not read. Nobody ever watches them, but I do, which is good, isn't it? Because sometimes there are things that happen in there that are absolutely astounding and just confirm that the inner corruption of the state is so strong that nobody really wants to deal with it. I watched a video the other day. It was possibly the most astounding video I've ever watched, and it was the Foreign Affairs Committee, and they were talking about Russian corruption, particularly dirty Russian money being embezzled and laundered through London. And as they were talking about it, you could see the audience in the background kind of going, are they really supposed to be saying these things? Are they really supposed to be saying these things? And it was so astounding, I instantly started looking up to see if there are any news articles about it, and you never guess what? Not a single news agency or newspaper or news program did any coverage on what was the most amazingly revealing committee meeting possibly ever. So I'm gonna make a video about it. And they start quite simply with the question of how much money is laundered through London.
I mean, I think I don't know how long we have, but just to look at the historical context of this, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So this money is deeply embedded in our system and has been since at least the 1950s. In that regard, how much money is being laundered that's already been laundered, it becomes a bit of a tricky question. I think possibly the interesting thing to draw attention to is the Deutsche Bank analysis of the errors and omissions data from 2015, which is called dark money. They reckoned that at that stage the amount was accelerating. They were putting it at about £1 billion a month. That is on the low side compared to the National Crime Agency's estimate, which is £100 billion a year. But I would say that at a minimum of £1 billion a month, and I think 100 billion, obviously there's quite a lot of zeros at the end of 100 billion, which I think possibly alerts us to the fact that it's a guess.
And can you, just to build upon that point, where do you think, what assets has that hidden money basically gone into?
Well, I'd say the majority of it's going into property, just because if you've got that much money, there isn't that much you can spend it on. Obviously, luxury goods, art, yachts, and so on. A certain amount goes into private schooling. If you look at the nationality of children, foreign children attending British private schools, you can see that the top three are Hong Kong, China, and Russia.
They said they went on a tour of various properties in London which are accused of being sold for overinflated prices as a form of money laundering.
When some of us went on a tour of a lot of these properties last week, we were being repeatedly told that such and such a house was bought for £26 million when it was only really worth £6 million. Can somebody explain to me why anybody would do that?
I'm not myself, sadly, a high-ranking money launderer, but I understand that if your asset has an inflated price, you can then raise quite a lot of money from a bank on the back of it. And therefore, if your asset is worth £26 million, you can then take out a loan for however much it is, and you therefore have essentially laundered your money. I mean, I understand from the indictment against some of the indictments that Bob Mueller has brought in, this is exactly one of the ways that Ukrainian money was brought into the United States, by essentially inflating the value of property.
So in essence, you're laundering it because it's now
a loan from a bank PLC and not money that you've been given in brown bullet by.
And you might have been paying a third party who was sympathetic to you anyway.
Yeah,
It sort of explains a lot, doesn't it? Like, how does London's property market get so massively overinflated? It's because the houses aren't really worth that much. It's just a way of shuffling dodgy money. And the upper class always acts so superior.
high value dealers, estate agents, these aren't regulated sectors. So I mean, there is no regulation of company formation agents. Anyone could become a company formation agent. So how do you check? How do you strike them off? These are, I did an article about 29 Harley Street, which is a company formation agent called Formation's House. And it's like a fraud factory in the centre of London. There was just fraud after fraud after, insane frauds, Ocean 11 type fraud. And yet nothing apparently, it's still operating, nothing's been done.
It's quite interesting actually, there's like a winding up petition due to the company unable to pay its debts. Interesting. 29 Harley Street is an interesting building, isn't it? Apparently the way that it's done is that if you want to do some dodgy business and you really don't want anyone to know who the hell you are, you start 3 companies, each owning the other 2. So company number 1 owns company 2 and 3, company 2 owns 1 and 3 also, and number 3 owns 1 and 2. And that way, any investigation into who owns it just goes round and round in circles, and nobody can really find out. And it can just sit there. Where is it? There. You can just sit there, and nobody does anything about it. There's some legislation brought in a few years back which said that those sort of shenanigans should not continue, and therefore companies must be owned by an actual human. Weird that, isn't it? But the only thing is that it's not enforced at all. Nobody's enforcing it. And it's not that they don't know. There's a company called Child and Child, which is doing similar sorts of things. We'll go down there and I'll show you.
I'll just give you one small example. We found a company next to Buckingham Palace that set up a offshore company for the daughters of the president of Azerbaijan via Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian firm, and they were asked whether these people were politically exposed people, and they said no, which was what's the word in this place? Untrue. Let's say it's untrue. It was untrue. And we got in touch with them and said, look, we've seen these documents. They refused to comment. We referred the matter to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and of course they're still in business. And they're still setting up, I imagine, I've got no proof of this, but they're still setting up similar companies.
And what are the names here?
It's called Child and Child.
Washing off the DNA, probably. That's a joke. This is the Nova building, Victoria. And that's where the Child and Child company are based. And the astounding thing is, well, it's not astounding when you really understand it, but it is the company that is funneling dodgy money by creating shell companies not really belonging to anybody and is supposedly invisible, is in exactly the same building as a part of GCHQ, the National Cyber Security Centre. Do you think they really don't know about it? Of course they do.
When we talk to ministers about this, we questioned the Foreign Secretary about this last week, and he claims, it's a law enforcement issue, the law enforcement agencies have got the powers that are necessary, politicians can't intervene, we can't tell them what to do, and all of that. Do you think that the law enforcement agencies have the tools they need to tackle this? Or do you think that, I can see Juliet is
I think
chomping
they
at
do
the
have
bit?
the tools. I just don't think they have the political backing.
So,
I think they do have the tools. I just don't think they have the political backing to do
Yeah.
it. I think all the side. I think they're discouraged from doing it.
actively discouraged?
If you look at donations to the Conservative Party, a lot of Russian money coming in that way. But I think generally, in terms of the interests of the city, the engine of our economy, shutting off the Russian money tap is not in the city's interest. And we were looking in particular at private jets in the Isle of Man.
The Lewis Hamilton case.
The Lewis Hamilton case. He kind of was the exception because most people, I think, the list that we had, because of our league, had about 50 jets on it. And most of the names were Russian or Russian Federation, Ukraine, etc. So not only were they getting a very generous tax break from the British government in terms of the VAT that would normally be due on a $60 million private jet, but they were getting a certificate that allowed them to fly in and out of European airports unquestioned by customs and undisturbed. But they were getting a certificate that allowed them to fly in and out of European airports unquestioned by customs and undisturbed.
The city,
On Saturday, like when we
they called it the engine of the economy. Well, it seems the economy is based on a structure of internal corruption being writ large and provided as a structure for corruption around the world. It seems the city wants dirty money flooding into it because they themselves are dirty. There's something pretty interesting that came out of that parliamentary committee, something that I didn't know until watching it, was about the creation of what's called the euro dollar back in the 1950s, which was essentially US dollars outside of America in Europe, so nothing to do with the euro currency. And they said that the euro dollar essentially was created because there was a lot of dirty Russian money belonging to Russia but couldn't be held in Russia because the Americans essentially were starting to sanction Russia and wanting to confiscate it, and so it was funneled into British banks in order to keep it out of the hands of the Americans. And they said actually that the very prosperity of the City of London after the Second World War and the reseating of the City of London as the world's financial hub was only possible because of the funneling of dirty Russian money. And has much changed, do you think? Do you think when Theresa May insinuates that Russia is an enemy of ours, it's just a PR stunt to stop people from realizing that the inner corruption of both Britain and Russia is more closely linked than we might like to think?